Okay, good morning, everyone. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of Chapter 8, I am going to review a couple things with you that's very important to recall. One is fraction operations. We'll be working with fractions or rational expressions quite often. Rational meaning ratio, ratio meaning fraction. And then we also need to review factoring, but today I'll look at a review of fraction operations. So here, let's just review. In adding and subtracting fractions, you have to have the same common denominator. Okay, the denominator must be the same. So let me give an example here. So let's say here, oops, what happened to my circle? There it goes. Somehow the PC wants to screw up. So I have a circle here, and let's say it's a pizza, and one day I eat 1/2 of the pizza. Okay, and then let's say here, so I save the other half for the next day, and I eat that. So from those 2 days, I've eaten one whole pizza. So we can write that as a fraction, 1/2 plus 1/2 gave me, now because the denominator is the same, 2 and 2, I can add the numerator, 1 and 1. So 1 plus 1 is equal to 2, so 2 over 2. Okay, don't make the mistake, please, of saying 1 plus 1 is 2 and 2 plus 2 is 4. Not when you're adding fractions. Okay, so we ate one whole pizza. Don't make the mistake of saying 1/2 plus 1/2 is equal to 2/4. That would be wrong. Okay, that's a common mistake I see quite often. All right, so again, key point. We must have the same common denominator before we add and subtract fractions. So I'll just go over some more examples here. Okay, so here, let's say here I have 1/3 plus 1/3. Because the denominator is the same, I can just add the numerator, 1 plus 1. So 1 plus 1 is equal to 2, and then that's 2/3. Again, that would not be 2/6. And another example. So let's say here I have 1/2, and then I'm going to add to that 1/5. Now notice my denominator is not the same. Okay, before I can add those two fractions, I need to have the same denominator. Well, how do I get the same denominator? Well, I can take the first fraction, 1/2, and I can multiply that fraction by the denominator of the other fraction, which is 5. So I'll multiply both the numerator and denominator by 5. And then I can take the second fraction, 1/5, and multiply that by the denominator in the first fraction, which is 2. So now 5 times 1 is 5, and 5 times 2 is 10, and then plus 1 times 2 is 2, and 5 times 2 is 10. My denominators are the same. Now I can just add the numerator. So 5 plus 2 is equal to 7. So 7/10. Okay. And then finally, the last example, here I'll be subtracting fractions. And let's say here I have 1/3, and I'm going to subtract 1/2. So again, notice my denominator, they're different. Okay, so I'll multiply the first fraction, 1/3, by what's in the denominator in the second fraction, which is 2. So I'll multiply that first fraction by 2. And then I'll multiply the second fraction, 1/2, by what's in the denominator in the first fraction, which is 3. Okay, so 2 times 1 is 2. 2 times 3 is 6. And then minus 1 times 3 is 3. And then 2 times 3 is 6. And then now I can subtract. My denominator is the same. And 2 minus 3 will give me minus 1. So minus 1/6, or negative 1/6. Okay, so again, key point, before you can add and subtract fractions, you have to have the same common denominator. All right, now we go on to multiplying fractions. Key point with multiplying fractions, we always simplify before multiplying. Okay, that's going to be so important in Chapter 8. Simplify before multiplying. Otherwise, it's going to make your life very, very difficult in Chapter 8. So let's just take a look at some examples. Okay, so here, let's say here, I have an example. I have 1/2, and I'm going to multiply that by 4/5. So what I mean by simplifying, well, let me review. So let's say here if I have 2/4. I could simplify that, right? I can divide both 2 and 4 by 2. So that would give me 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 4 divided by 2 is 2. So 2/4 is the same as 1/2. Well, with fractions, when we multiply fractions, we want to do the same thing. Okay? So we can simplify up or down, or we can simplify in the diagonals. Okay? Either way you do it, however you want to do it, or however you can do it. Okay, you want to simplify before. Here, let me just erase that. You want to simplify before multiplying. So this was 4/5. Okay, so I see that I can't simplify anything between 1 and 2 and 4 and 5, but I can simplify in the diagonals here. So I'll simplify in the diagonals. Now what can I simplify? So I see 2 and 4. Both 2 is common to 2 and 4. So I can say 2 goes into 2 once, and then 2 goes into 4 twice. All right? And then I see there's nothing else I can simplify, so now I'll just multiply. 1 times 2 is 2, and then 1 times 5 is 5. So 1/2 times 4/5 is 2/5. Okay? And then for the final example, multiplying fractions, let's say here I have 3/10, and I'm going to multiply that by 5 over 27. So again, I see that there's nothing I can simplify between the 3 and the 10. There's nothing I can simplify in the 5 and 27, but I can simplify in the diagonals. All right? So let's do that. So 3 goes into 3 once, into 27 9 times, and 5 goes into 5 once, and into 10 twice. So now I can multiply my numerator. 1 times 1 is 1. And now my denominator, 2 times 9 is 18, and I get 1 over 18. Okay? Key point, simplify before multiplying. That's going to be very important in Chapter 8. And then the last operation I'll take a look at is dividing fractions. So key point, anytime we divide fractions, we want to turn division into multiplication. And how do we do that? We invert the divisor and multiply. And I'll show you why that works. So here, let me just say I have another circle, pizza, or whatever. And here I have 1/2. So there, I ate 1/2 of the pizza. Or I have 1/2 of pizza, however you want to look at it. Okay, now let's say here if I take that 1/2 and I'm going to divide that by 2. So notice here I get 1/4 there and 1/4. Okay? So I can write that as a division of fractions. Okay, so I had 1/2 and I divided that by 2. In my example, I got 1/4. Okay, so what we want to do when we're dividing one fraction by another fraction, well, first let me write 2 as a fraction. That's 2 over 1. Okay, so when we divide one fraction by another fraction, we invert the divisor. The divisor in my case is 2 over 1, so that's my divisor. And then we want to invert the divisor and multiply. So I'll have 1/2. Invert means to take the reciprocal or just flip it over. So 2 over 1 flipped over is 1 over 2. Or the reciprocal of 2 over 1 is 1 over 2. Okay, so 1/2 times 1/2 is equal to 1/4. And that's what I got in the example here. When I took 1/2 of the pizza and then I divided it by 2, I got 1/4. And here, so it's a couple more examples. So let's say here I have 1/2, and I'm going to divide that by 5. Okay, so again, I'll write 5 as a fraction, 5 over 1. I'll take 1/2 and take the reciprocal, or 5 over 1, which is 1 over 5, or invert 5 over 1, which is 1/5. So 1/2 divided by 5 is the same as 1/2 times 1/5, and that's equal to 1/10. And then here, the last example. So let's say here I have 2/3, and I'm going to divide that by 8 over 15. So again, my divisor is 8 over 15. I want to invert that and multiply. So I have 2/3 times, if I invert 8 over 15, I get 15 over 8. Now, I'll simplify on the diagonals. So let's see here. 2 goes into 2 once, into 8 4 times. And then 3 goes into 3 once and into 15 5 times. And then I have 1 times 5 is 5. And then 1 times 4 is 4. So I get 5/4. So 2/3 divided by 8/15 is 5/4. Okay, so what I want you to do, I want you to do these 12 problems and submit your work on Schoology, either PDF or an image as you've done before. So we have 6 problems where you have to add and subtract. So I want you to do those 6 and show your work. And then we have 6 problems where you have to multiply and divide. Okay, so show your work and then turn it in.